You're listening to the ONSIDE Podcast, the podcast for innovation-driven entrepreneurship here in Atlantic Canada. I'm your host, Alex McCann, and this is Season 2. And the theme this month is the journey of becoming an entrepreneur. Today, I'm joined by Alfred Burgesson, a social entrepreneur whose unique talents include convening leaders and an ability to launch grassroots movements while utilizing digital tools and technology platforms for good. Most recently, he supported the African Canadian Senate Group and the Office of Senator Colin Deacon as a project lead, gathering data and insights on the current state of Black entrepreneurs and business owners in Canada. He is currently the founder and CEO of the Tribe Network, a social enterprise building Canada's BIPOC entrepreneurship and innovation hub. The Tribe Network is on a mission to improve the well-being of Black, Indigenous, and people of color through innovation and entrepreneurship. Alfred, welcome to the show. I'm happy to welcome you to the ONSIDE Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm a fan of this podcast. Some great people have come on before me, so I feel like I've got some shoes to fill here joining you.
Well, we're glad to have you. So gave a little background about you and shared some of your accomplishments and things like that. But as always, we like to warm things up on our podcast and hoping that you can share a little bit about yourself. I actually remember the first time that I got to have a conversation with you. We had a walk in the woods and I didn't get to ask you any questions. You just had to tell me all about yourself. So I'm just going to pretend we're doing that now. So.
Nice. I like that. It was at Windhorse.
It was at Windhorse.
Got to give Windhorse a shout out.
Yeah.
Beautiful place.
Yeah. It was a warm, sunny day and it was the first time we met. So that was really great. So for our listeners who do not know your story, who is Alfred? What are you about?
Great question. I'm still discovering who I am, that's for sure. But I'm 25 years old. My journey began in Africa, in West Africa. So I was born in Ghana and grew up in Ghana until I was 6 years old. And then my parents decided to move our family to Canada, not just to Canada, but to Nova Scotia and to Cape Breton and to Port Hawkesbury.
Oh, I did not know that part. Okay.
rural Nova Scotia, Port Hawkesbury is where we landed, and that's because my dad was an engineer.
Okay.
And he was a professor at the NSCC Nautical School.
Oh, great location.
In Port Hawkesbury.
Yeah, impressive place.
Yeah. So Port Hawkesbury is where we landed and grew up there, lived there for about 10 years until I came to Halifax in high school. And when I came to Halifax, I went to the grammar school. And, I was a basketball player growing up, and I thought I was going to go to the NBA, and that was my goal, that was my goal.
Go all the way.
Go all the way. But yeah, I played basketball competitively growing up locally with Basketball Nova Scotia, was ranked at one point top 50 in Canada.
Oh, right.
And then, I came to the grammar school because they had a really great basketball coach and basketball program, but also academic-wise, a really great school for academics as well. So it was an easier sell to my parents than going to New Jersey or something like that.
Right.
But growing up, sports were a huge part of my life. And when I went to grammar, I was a player and I was a coach at the same time. I was coaching the junior high teams. And grammar really sort of introduced me to entrepreneurship. The junior achievement after school program called the company program.
Right.
That was when I got my first taste into entrepreneurship. And it was just like, okay, this is like my language. It was weird. It was just like this moment of like, this is what I want to do. And it was really interesting because the peers that I was with were all looking at me like asking questions as if I had the answers. You know what I mean? It's just like, Alfred knows. And it's like, this is my first time in this sort of environment. But I could tell that I had the ability to sort of to ideate and to also think about connecting ideas to real things that were happening or people that could achieve it, that could help implement it. So from a young age, I realized that, I had some sort of talent to take ideas into action. And growing up, I went off to St. Mary's to play basketball there for a year. I quit after my first year to start my first business in digital media.
Okay. What did your parents think about that?
Oof. I mean, quitting basketball wasn't such a big issue for them. I think when I decided to take a break from school.
Oh, okay. That was the problem.
When I decided to take a break from university, that's when I could, they were unsure of what is Alfred doing, right? But at that point, so when I started my digital media company, I would walk door to door businesses in Halifax, and I would show them Facebook and Instagram, and I would say, I don't see your business on here. Do you know that if you market your product on here, people anywhere in Canada, around the world, can actually purchase it? So I did a lot of that, and essentially created a small team of photographers, videographers, graphic designers, young people in the city that were talented but didn't really have an avenue to make money through that skill set that they had. And so I would go get business, and we would come together, and then we would execute on actually, developing campaigns and content for our clients. And during that time, I came across the Assembly of First Nations through another client. And so this is during my third year university. And the Assembly of First Nations approached me and said they needed some support for their chiefs in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and then, the chiefs also in Ottawa could use my support in amplifying some
their
of
voices,
amplifying their voices, their projects, etc. And so, in third year university, I have the option to either go to poli-sci and entrepreneurship classes, or to get on a plane, go to Ottawa, and sit in a room where chiefs and ministers are negotiating. And to me, that was a no-brainer. I'm going to Ottawa.
It's like I can learn about poli-sci, or I could actually be living it and be part of it. Oh,
exactly.
That's really interesting.
And so that was a key moment for me in taking a step and learning a lot more about Canadian culture, Canadian history, Indigenous rights, and that also definitely played a key role in, I think, forming who I am today.
Oh, interesting. That is a brave step. We've had a couple other folks who came to that point where they had to make a decision like that. Stay on the path that has been charted out for you, or find another path. I think we had Saeed El-Darhali. He's the CEO for Simplycast, and I think he had that moment too as a young man, thinking about, what else can I do with the skills that I have? Because there's a path that's laid out, and there's the path less taken.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your family, and that family's from Ghana that came to Port Hawkesbury, rural Nova Scotia. The NSCC Nautical Institute is an amazing place, and you have this journey. Were there any barriers, coming from Ghana and being from someplace, different and being in Canada? Were there any barriers that your family or you guys faced as new immigrants?
Yeah, I was 6 years old. So I think at that age, I don't think I was really, let's say, aware of barriers like the way my parents were, or my older siblings were. I mentioned my dad was a professor at NSCC, but before he became a professor, he actually had to be a student at NSCC.
Oh, okay.
Right? So he had a career of 20 plus years as an engineer working globally, decides to move his family to Canada, and it's like, nope, you got to start all over again.
Right. He had to get recertified.
Yeah. And so, both my parents had to go through that, going from students. And, with my dad, they knew he had the ability, literally the year after he graduated, they made him a professor. You know what I mean?
They're like, thank you very much for being the top student. Let's just move ahead here.
Exactly. So I think that was frustrating for them to come here and to have to start from the bottom again. And, I think in Port Hawkesbury is not a very diverse place. I think it's getting more diverse now because there are a lot more immigrant students going to NSCC and CBU. But in 2003, there were 2 black families in the town.
Okay.
And so, I think there was a lot of just societally, you could tell that you were different. You know what I mean? You never fit into a place like that. And so I think growing up, perhaps, I think my parents and my older siblings, and to some degree myself too, just challenged a little bit with getting along with others, or feeling like you belong, feeling like you fit in. And I think, that's kind of been a thread for me since Port Hawkesbury. It's how do I create my community? You know what I mean? How do I find my tribe? And it's kind of been this constant sort of push to find a tribe and to create a tribe. But certainly, being an immigrant, in Port Hawkesbury and in Canada, it was not easy. My parents ended up having to get a divorce because, things were just tough. Things were tough financially. Things were tough.
Yeah.
And I think my dad felt a lot of pressure to succeed. And so It is a tough experience, and I'm not sure I can speak to it as well as my parents could probably give you details as their landing experience was like. As a kid, I think some of that might have been kept away from me. But I certainly experienced, whether it was racism in school or people just being rude, like I definitely experienced that growing up.
Or just ignorant. Or
Yeah, totally.
I appreciate you sharing that as well. I'm an immigrant myself and a new Canadian. I'm very excited about this.
Congrats.
Yeah. I got my official welcome certificate, or I don't know, it has a little barcode on it. I'm like, I better not lose this. Go back. But it's always an interesting journey. And even if your cultures are very similar, it's a big transition moving from one culture to another and being in a place where you're not in the majority and trying to fit in. And I imagine reskilling and getting recertified. Definitely heard of other journeys like that. It's really tough.
Yeah.
So back to the thinking about our journey on becoming an entrepreneur. It was really interesting. You were mentioning kind of this opportunity that you had to go to Ottawa and work with your business. Was that the thing that first sort of digital media company and engagement with diverse people and trying to amplify other voices, was that the thing that kind of started to inspire you to want to continue to go on this journey of being an entrepreneur, or what was your inspiration?
Yeah. I mean, in the early days, I had no idea what I was doing. All right. It was just like, I wanted to pursue this idea of getting more businesses online using social media and selling their product online. It was just like, it just made sense to me. You know what I mean? It was like, why are they not doing this? And we've got a bunch of young people that can create content. Let's sort of make that connection where young people can create content for businesses. But I think when I started to realize that this would be was a viable option for me was when, we started to get some big clients, and here I am now paying my peers thousands of dollars for work that they're doing. And it was like, wow, it felt good to actually be able to provide a peer enough money that they could afford a better camera or, and
you're like, we're making money.
We're making money.
We're being successful.
Yeah. And one of the clients that we had that made me realize, okay, there's something here was when we got a contract with NBA Canada back in the day.
Wow.
And that was when I was like, oh, wow. So I just quit basketball after basketball being my love, right? But at the same time, it's like, oh, I can still be around the game. I can still work in the game, but from a different, not as a player, but you know what I mean? As a director, as a producer. And so that was a really interesting moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, business is it's not boring. You know what I mean? I can do the things I love via business. And so, and shout out to Miriam Zittner. She was the one who connected us with NBA Canada at that time.
Nice.
But yeah, I think those early days of having big clients like that and seeing how excited my peers were to get a contract and to be able to do what they just enjoy doing and earn money.
Yeah.
That's when I started to realize okay, there's something here. And I also realized that from the beginning, it wasn't just I want to get rich sort of thing. It was just how do you create a collective? How do you create this sort of community type feel to the venture, you know? And so I remember reading a lot of Stanford social review pages and articles around social entrepreneurship. And so for me, I think from the beginning, I've always been fascinated by a different way of business or a social way of business. And that's something that has definitely stuck ever since, JA, for example.
Well, there's definitely this in the last several years. I think social purpose businesses, social enterprises has always kind of been there. But there seems to be more of a willingness from the mainstream or the corporate world, maybe co-opting some of these ideas as well. But I think more and more people are interested in purpose-led businesses, social entrepreneurship. We have all kinds of structures like B Corps and things like that where companies are really trying to assess how value is created. How do we create value beyond just
shareholders?
Money? Yeah.
And shareholders, right? How do you distribute wealth in such a way that the employees benefit greatly, and the people you're serving also benefit greatly, and you're not necessarily constantly taking, but you're also finding ways to give through whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We probably talked about this before, but at ONSIDE, one of the things we're focused on is inclusive, innovation-driven entrepreneurship. And we're always thinking about who's benefiting from being involved in innovation and entrepreneurship, who gets to participate, who makes the decisions, who gets to generate wealth from participating in these kinds of activities. And I think it's a really important conversation that people are bringing to the forefront and really starting to think about. And I think it's really great that you've at such a mature age of age 25, come to this a little sooner than maybe some of us around the table. But I think that that's really great. And I thought it was really interesting you were just mentioning, about wanting to bring like-minded or have this community feel around the work that you were doing. And maybe can you touch on that a little bit about if there were some experiences or things that you are trying to do in terms of bringing people together as you develop your businesses or things like that? Maybe that's touching a little bit on your values and the things that you're trying to align in your work and in your business. What are the things that you're thinking about there?
Well, I'll say this. The experience working with the Assembly of First Nations, definitely, I spent a lot of time with Indigenous peoples and on reserve. And, there's just a way of being that isn't extractive, I guess. There's always this sort of sense of doing things for the greater good. And it's this reciprocity of it doesn't have to be said that you did this for me, so I'm gonna have to do this for you down the line. But it's just this is just the way we are. This is the way it is. We support each other. We help each other, and we create opportunities where many people in the community can benefit, not just a select few or those around the table sort of thing. I don't know. I think I was just, so working with the AFN, you have this sort of experience where the chiefs and some community members that I get to meet are almost sharing an alternative way to how our structure's already set up. You know what I mean? It was for me, I was just hearing things positioned in a way that was almost just different from what the norm would be expected. And it wasn't to say that, this is a better way, but it was just this is our way.
Yeah.
Right?
There is more than one way.
Yeah.
The way that you've always done things does not necessarily have to be the way. Yeah, we had another guest who talked a little bit about this, on two-eyed seeing and looking at the world in a different way. I've been doing some reading and things around this, around different ways of knowing and understanding a problem or trying to come to a solution. And I think there's probably more than one way. And when you step into that, you're like, oh, wait a minute. People are able to move ahead, make decisions, build companies, have products, and we don't have to do it the Wolf of Wall Street style.
Yeah, totally.
We don't have to stab people in the back and crush them all the time.
Exactly. And so I tried to be as present as I was in those moments. I wasn't taking notes while I was in community or anything like that, but there were just things that I picked up about how to ensure that there are either more people at the table, ensure that when there are people at the table that you truly value everyone's opinion, and to look at everyone as being a contributor and having something to contribute versus the CEO or whoever else is the top dog and the only person who leads the conversation. It's no, everyone is able to lead the conversation, right? And so I think an experience like that definitely influenced me. And so after that experience, I launched HFX Collective. And so HFX Collective was a remix of my first digital media business. And we went from creating content for companies to essentially consulting with companies and doing community engagement events and supporting them on program design. And so, working with a Crown Corp on how do you get more youth engaged in making decisions on potential infrastructure projects, or how do you ensure that Black people in Halifax are at the table when we're talking about housing. Like, so, you know, I just, this sort of sense of inclusivity was one that I think I picked up in a profound way through the Assembly of First Nations and through just, you know, the way things were set up and the way things were ran. And for me, that was like a huge influence on everything I've done since then, including Tribe.
Yeah, well, we'll touch on that. We will definitely touch on that. Do you think, I mean, it's really interesting to hear your reflection on the experiences that you've had and how you've been able to kind of internalize this. And just before the podcast, you were telling me about your early morning walk where you get to think about things and all of that. In reflecting back on kind of these like experiences, has any of this kind of changed your priorities around like how you move ahead? You talked a little bit about making sure there's voices that are heard or things like that, but has it changed your priorities with regard either to the work that you're doing now or just in your own general life or how you try to move forward? Yeah,
I think, you know, in my early days of starting that digital media company and not just knocking on any door of a business to say, hey, I want to help you sell your product. I think I'm starting to, let's say, I'm starting to prioritize the people who don't even have a store yet that I can knock on, right? I'm prioritizing those who just haven't had the opportunity to start, to, you know, meaningfully build something and to accelerate something to another level. So I think through the Assembly of First Nations, I just started to realize that, you know, there is inequity in the world. And in Canada, there's immense inequity that has been for generations. And I think the priority has come out to be just like, how can you invite those who aren't at the table or those who aren't able to tap into a trust fund or whatever to build a business? Like, how can you support those who don't have that access and those opportunities? How can you support them to start and to believe in themselves and to have access to resources, to have access to people who look like them that have done it, to hear those stories? I think my priority has definitely leaned into like, how do we ensure that those people also have an opportunity versus the ones who are already doing it and are thriving? Yeah, that there's space. I always, someone asked me something about that and I was like, you know, I think it's really important that there's space for whoever wants to step into it. I'm not saying everybody has to be an entrepreneur or has to do these things, but if you're interested or even want to check it out, that there's space for you and you're welcome to experience it in your own way. And also, I think that it's for you to decide what you want to be in that space. That there's more than, as you're kind of saying about your time with the Assembly of First Nations and, you know, things you're picking up there, realizing that there's not just one way to be an entrepreneur, not one way to step into business, there's definitely more than one way to be a person. So I think we can accept the variety of life. Totally. But I think especially in entrepreneurship, you look up to the people who've done it and then you there's a lot of copying, right? In terms of the culture in entrepreneurship and in general, I feel like folks look up to people, but, you know, I think maybe sometimes we look up to the wrong people. And so I think that's when I say learning about another way, I think there's a bit of that in that there's traditionally in entrepreneurship, there's the way things are done where you start a business, you raise money and all that type of stuff. It's like, it doesn't always have to be done that way, right? And it doesn't always have to be for the benefit of shareholders. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to when I mention that. Yeah, well, it's interesting. There are all these movies or shows that are out now. The WeWork one, the Uber, what's the other one? There's like a whole bunch of these. Oh, yeah. There's a whole bunch of these about the kind of like Silicon Valley, you know, tech entrepreneur who like goes big and goes hard and crashes hard. Oh my God. And I think that's a really important thing, you know, and we kind of love the drama of that. But I think what you're kind of talking about is like sort of disrupting the image or the imagery that we have around us
that allows for other folks to step in. And, maybe before that there was something else, but I think people are pushing for that. I don't know if we're there totally yet, but I think we're kind of like on the precipice
for sure
of people saying, yeah, I'm kind of tired of the we crash, we work, these people who like rise to the top and crash and burn. And, there's a place. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I love my Uber. Love it, but we probably need some other models for this moment in time.
Yeah. And other examples of more diverse leaders, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Love to see that. And speaking about that, you are a Black entrepreneur here in Nova Scotia. What has that been like here in our ecosystem? How do you reflect on being a Black entrepreneur?
It's a great question. So there's so many different answers to this.
Loaded question.
Yeah. So I'll start from the perspective as an immigrant Black entrepreneur, because as many of our listeners will know, in Nova Scotia there is a historical Black community, and there are several,
of the oldest,
right? And there are several different Black communities in Nova Scotia. And coming to Nova Scotia from Africa, I think there's a level of drive my parents instilled in us at an early age to they definitely educated us on like the world is not fair. There was that, but there was just this like the work ethic my parents had was such, like, set the standard.
Yeah, they were like, you gotta push.
They just set the standard. I mean, they left everything in Ghana to come here, so it was just like there's no plan B. There's no other option than to be successful and to pursue success and greatness every day. And then so in the contrast, I'll say, when it comes to African Nova Scotians and Indigenous Blacks, I think there's a level of neglect those communities have had for generations.
Definitely.
There's a level of trauma that people have. There's a level of distrust that they have in institutions to support them. And so I think, those two comparisons between a Black immigrant and someone who is Black and grew up in Nova Scotia, I think oftentimes when an immigrant lands, it's like, I will do anything to get the job, or I will do anything to make sure that this thing that I'm doing succeeds. And I'm not saying that African Nova Scotians don't have that same drive. I'm not saying that, but I do believe that there's a level of intergenerational trauma. And I think that trauma hurts people from actually walking into some spaces. Yeah. All right. And so there's that. And I think as a Black immigrant entrepreneur, when I started to walk into some spaces, I knew that I wasn't necessarily walking into an inclusive space or a space that was very diverse, but I did it anyway. And I would hang out and I would, see who was in there. I would see what kind of help I could get. I could see what's going on. But oftentimes I would be the only one, the only one in the space. And I had experiences where you ask someone to support you on something, and the support given is not perhaps what you might deem as valuable or supportive, truly supportive, versus just doing it so that they can move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, but I'll also say that as someone who went to the grammar school, as someone who has that level of drive, I don't really let that stuff get to me, Yeah. I don't really let it get to me. And going through grammar, as tough as that was, I was able to create a network and be connected with influential people in Halifax. And I think that alone, like in high school, being able to be in that type of environment made me believe that, like, I can be someone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You had to persevere, through stuff. You just had to, I think you're right. I think there's definitely this intergenerational trauma that holds folks back, and it's really hard to get out of that. I think people are trying to make a big move now, like in the last couple of years, really trying to address this and reflect on it and put things in place that says, okay, we need to take some action here.
Yeah, we need to level the playing field.
Yeah.
We need to support them and their well-being first.
Yeah, yeah.
And that means creating environments that they feel safe in.
Welcome.
Right?
Yeah.
It means going out of the way to make sure that you get rid of barriers that will allow them to enter the space for whether it's an event or a program that you're hosting in a specific place.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some factors I think that touch on the experience of a Black entrepreneur in this ecosystem. I mean, I never did go to a bank to get money or a loan or anything like that, but obviously we know that there are tons of cited reports and I mean just experiences of Black entrepreneurs seeking capital that are turned down.
Yeah.
And again,
this is well documented.
This is very well documented.
If it may not have happened to you specifically, but there's a lot of things that are well known, documented, and even in like some of our stuff, we have our inclusive innovation monitor. We talk about some of the indicators around salary discrepancies. If you're a Black male tech worker, you're on average in Canada making $13,000 less than your white male counterpart.
Right.
So there's a lot of facts and figures that are out there, and I think we're kind of at that point where it's time to take some action. Yeah. Because the eyes of the world are now finally open. Well, I want to thank you for sharing that perspective and those insights. I've maybe one more little question. This is a kind of a ONSIDE favorite type of question we like to ask all of our guests. Kind of, I think at some point we'll like rack them all up and like do a little like tally to see which side is winning. But my question is nurture versus nature. Do you think entrepreneurs are born or do you think they're made? I feel like I'm kind of 50-50 on this one with our tally. But what do you think? Nurture versus nature?
I'm leaning towards nurture. I do think there are certain people that come out as salespeople. You know what I mean?
They're like 5 years old.
They're just there's that. But I do think being some of it is also like the environment that you're in when you're 16, the environment that you're introduced to when you're 16, right? And I think, and I like to think it's nurture because I do believe that we can, change the way people get access to opportunities. And I think, entrepreneurship is something we have to introduce at a younger age to people so that they see it as a viable option. And I mean, we're hearing with the Great Resignation right now, and you're seeing so much change in the workforce that I think a lot of people are wanting to be entrepreneurs, but perhaps don't have the right tools or not in the right environments to be an entrepreneur. And so I like to think that it's nurture because I'm hopeful and optimistic to say that we can create environments for entrepreneurs to be made.
Yeah, or become entrepreneurial minded or spirit, because not everyone's going to start their own business, or you have people who are the entrepreneurs or things like that. Okay, so I'm putting you down for team nurture. Gotta get the tally going. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your journey with us. For folks who want to learn more about you, what you're up to, what's the best way they can connect with you, Alfred?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. And of course, if you want to learn more about Tribe Network, you can visit tribenetwork.ca.
Okay, that's awesome. And I want to thank all of our listeners today for tuning in to the ONSIDE podcast. You can learn more about ONSIDE and our work around inclusive innovation and entrepreneurship at onsidenow.ca, or you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. And as we come to a close, I'd really like to thank Communities, Culture, and Heritage for your support. We're so grateful for your support in helping us make this podcast. All right, thanks, and we'll see you next time.
This has been a Podstarter production.